I'd like to turn our attention to genetically modified skeptic. And for those of you who are watching this video because perhaps you just found this randomly on YouTube or it was recommended to you, that is the name of a channel on YouTube that is run by an atheist whose name is Drew. I never can remember his last name, but he goes by the name Genetically Modified Skeptic. Very approachable, wonderful, sweet guy. I can tell that he seems to have a real care for people, and that is a good thing, even if it's expressed in a worldview that has problems. And so what we want to focus on here is he made a video about his experience in an evangelical Christian university, and he talked a little bit about the sexual ethics that Christians have in a place like that. And I did a whole video on that as it relates to just sexuality in general. But he spoke about a particular person, and that person is Dr. Yuan. And so I thought, man, it'd sure be great if I could get Dr. Yuan to come to humble himself, to come down to my little channel and react to this. So I'm going to read what Drew said here. This is directly from the transcript of the YouTube video, so I don't think there'll be any problem there. And obviously this comes in the context of a bigger video, but I don't think this is out of context. And I'm going to put the link to that video in the description for anyone that thinks that I'm unfairly representing anything. They can go check that out. But here's what he said. He says, the curriculum for my psychology degree at this university reinforced the idea that personal anecdotes lacking any controls against confounding factors served as less reliable data points than observations made within an experimentally controlled environment. Meanwhile, the university proudly ignored all research on sexual orientation in favor of the anecdotes of evangelists who claimed to have turned straight by the grace of God. In fact, the university even had Christopher Yuan, a so-called ex-gay Christian evangelist, speak in one of our chapel services while I was there. He told us the story of how he found Jesus while he was in prison and subsequently stopped living as a gay man. We students were expected to see him as evidence for the claim that God can change our sexual orientation because, personal testimony is all we should need to believe that huge claim. However, during the Q&A which followed his presentation, a student asked a question which should have had an easy answer if God truly was in the business of turning people straight. The student asked, "Now that you've come to God, are you sexually attracted to women?" Christopher's answer, "No." His answer had most of the audience looking around at each other in confusion. After several seconds of silence, he asked for the next question and just moved on. It was obvious, even with all of his talk of God's power over sin, the reality was that he had simply chosen to be celibate. So we at this academic institution were expected to forego any consideration of scientific research on sexual orientation in favor of a narrative which we were told was supported by anecdotes of great Christians, but was in reality still not supported by the experience of the most accomplished ex-gay evangelist to which we had access. What are your thoughts, Christopher?
The most accomplished ex-gay. Anyway, I did have an opportunity to watch that. Someone else had given me a link before that. I wasn't familiar with Drew before. I love his setup. He obviously has a big following, and it's quite obvious why. He's quite articulate. He communicates really well. I think I'd enjoy kind of hanging out with him and getting to know him. So
it's so funny that you say that because my audience will know that is exactly what I've said about Drew on multiple occasions.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know him personally. I actually have no idea what school he went to. I would like to know. I don't know if he's ever talked about where he went. I mean, I've spoken at several different Christian schools, but I just don't know. What his school communicated. I don't know what his psychology department or I'm not part of that. As a matter of fact, when people invite me, it's not teachers, it's not professors, it was not the psychology department. I mean, from my memory, I don't think ever a psychology department ever invited me. It's always the chaplain. It's always maybe someone in the Bible department who's over a chapel that invites me to speak. So I can't really speak into, and I can't really have anything to say about whether the psychology department really was saying, you can pray away the gay. If they really said that, and if you've ever heard any of my videos or any of my more extensive talks, because again, I don't know what messages that I did at the school, because I don't know what school it was. I usually do give my testimony in chapel, but oftentimes I do have time to kind of give a broader talk afterward and do have a Q&A. I mean, I do find it interesting that he said, I simply said no and was silent. And I don't know, you've only been with me just for maybe half an hour, but I'm almost never silent. I usually have too much to say. So, I mean, I think it's really helpful that as any person of influence to be accurate, to portray a person, not distort the truth. And that's why whenever, like you say, if we're going to talk about others, whether it's someone that we don't agree with, whether it's an agnostic or an atheist or someone like, myself dealing with this issue of sexuality, if I'm quoting someone who's gay or a gay Christian, I hopefully don't want to misrepresent them. But it's quite interesting because though he might not be misrepresenting his school, I can't answer that. And obviously he's no longer Christian, so there's some other issues that's underlying this. So I don't want to make this as the only issue, or this issue that is not having implications that are tied indirectly or directly to other situations that has happened to him in his deconversion. But definitely, if you've heard my testimony, I never talked about that I've turned straight. I mean, I'm not even dating anyone. So, I would say someone who turns straight is someone who's maybe married, has children. That obviously isn't part of my story. I also don't ever use the word celibate. I think that's fraught with problems tied to the Catholic Church with all of its controversies with sex abuse and pedophilia and stuff. So I never use that word celibacy. I do talk about that I'm single, but I always talk about in the context of that I pursue holy sexuality, which is when I'm single, I'm going to be chaste. When I'm married, and I'm using Jesus' definition of marriage, man and a woman, Mark chapter 10 and Matthew 19, then I'm going to be faithful of my spouse. So I think, when people ask me, do I still have attractions? I put, this is what I normally say, I put in the context of, well, all of us, just simply because I might still have attractions or temptations doesn't then mean then that I am a certain way, or, first of all, I don't identify as gay. I don't think that that's an appropriate term for myself. Not to say that I'm straight, though, and that's the confusion. I think that's both of those categories are problematic. As a person who would be an atheist or agnostic or someone who identifies as LGBTQ, I think, the first thing of the gay community especially is to respect people as they label themselves. If a person says they're queer, well, that's how they want to be labeled. If a person says that, I'm not bi, I'm gay, or, I consider myself not gay, I prefer the term lesbian, or I'm not queer, I'm non-binary, whatever it is, I mean, we're going to respect that person for that word. And I, to date, have never used that phrase ex-gay. As a matter of fact, in my testimony, I even say that I don't identify as ex-gay. So there is a little, quite clear misrepresentation. I mean, again, I don't know where I spoke at, and if there's a recording that we can check on. Most likely there isn't, but I would never have said I am ex-gay.
Yeah, and let me be clear what we're doing here in mentioning this. What's the point of mentioning this? Well, the reason I wanted to talk about this is not because I think or am presenting the possibility that Drew, genetically modified skeptic, is intentionally being dishonest. Even just hearing the phrase ex-gay, you can pile on in your own thinking assumptions. Oh, they're showing us someone who used to be gay, therefore someone who used to have these desires and now is heterosexual. And again, like you said, the school could have set it up to reinforce that concept, or the school may have presented it right, but a particular person at the school said, oh yeah, it's a guy who's now heterosexual. So that's not the point. The point is really that guy's got hundreds of thousands of followers on YouTube. And so I wanted to use what influence I have to let you, Dr. Yuan, clarify what you are saying, so that people, when they do criticize us, which we can expect, they're not criticizing a straw man, but they're actually criticizing you for what you actually believe. And so that's good. But after I saw that video initially, I thought, well, let me go check some of the videos I can find of Dr. Yuan. And I found that, and this is the same with me when I go speak at various places. I have a few different talks that I give, and often I may say them the same way verbatim, especially my testimony. And I noticed that I've got a video here from you from last year. I've got one from 5 years ago, one from 10 years ago, and you tell the same story in the same way. And a piece of each of those presentations, because I checked, was this thing about it's about holiness, not about heterosexual or homosexual. So I thought that was clear, but I can see how, or I can imagine how someone could just hear the phrase ex-gay on the lips of a classmate or a teacher and then pile on assumptions.